Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to this event on Riefenstahl. We have Andres Veiel and Kate Connolly with us. Thank you very much. I will introduce them in a short while. I just quickly wanted to let you know that if you have any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A box, or you can also raise your hand in the Zoom function, and then I will let you in and you can ask the question in person if you prefer to do that. The Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen, and yeah, you can just click on it and add the question there. And before I introduce our two speakers, Andres has asked me to ask whether any of you have seen the film. So if you could raise your hand if that's the case, please do so. And there are quite a few. Well, there are 3, 4. Well, 4 people have seen the film. That answers your question. So probably it's good to do a little bit of an introduction to the film as well. And now, with no further ado, I will introduce the speakers. So Andres, he is considered one of the most distinguished representatives of politically engaged art in Germany. In addition to his film work, he also writes and directs stage plays, and he has won numerous awards, including the award for the Best Picture at last year's Venice International Film Festival. And Kate Connolly is the Guardian's Berlin correspondent, and she previously worked as a foreign correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, but first contributed to the Guardian in 1997. So now over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tamara. And thank you, Kate. Well, as director and author of Riefenstahl, I can tell you a little bit about the long journey. Actually, I got asked by the producer, Sandra Maischberger, I think something in 2018. But before she got access already to the estate, to the archive of Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl died in 2003 in Germany. She is one of the most controversial female filmmakers of the 20th century, very well known for films, or well known in brackets because they are really controversial, like Triumph of the Will and Olympia. And after she died, the estate was, first of all, handed over to her husband, and he died in 2016. And then it was passed to 3 museums in Berlin. And that was the chance of the producer to get access, making some sort of deal, like we are going to digitalize, starting from one of the 700 boxes, and step by step, all the findings were digitalized. And I came in 2018. And I have to admit, first of all, I was a little bit suspicious. Leni Riefenstahl is not only famous for her films, she's also famous for her legends and lies. And so this was a challenge because, of course, I knew that this estate is somehow prepared, and there's for sure she manipulated a lot. And but step by step, we went into the 700 boxes, and it was quite amazing to find some sort of new insight into 2 questions. First question, who is Leni Riefenstahl? By looking on her diaries, by sifting through her private films, sifting also through 50, 60, 70 hours of audio footage. Even she recorded her phone calls. We will talk about this later for sure. And so there was a lot of new insight. And the second question, which was something like a leading issue for us, was, what does Leni Riefenstahl mean for today? So these were the crucial questions. As I said, 700 boxes. It took a long time of preparation, all, I think, something like 20 months of just sifting through the archive, and then plus 18 months of editing. And the premiere was, as Tamara said, in Venice last year. Then I went to Telluride and US festival. We had the US release. And then for some reason, we will, I think, going to talk about with Kate. The film was quite successful. It was sold to over 35 countries now. We just had it released in the US, and before it was shown in Great Britain in May. There was the theatrical release in France, in Australia, in India, in many, many other countries. And it's a pity just a few of you would watch the film. I always say something like I had to deal with, I think, something like 1,000 hours of Leni Riefenstahl. The film is only 116 minutes, so it's really a battery shortcut. But let's start to talk with Kate, because I think she's the one to ask the best questions that are available. Thank you, Kate, for joining tonight.
Okay, thanks, Andres. It's nice to have the opportunity. Last time we spoke, it was, or we talked a little bit this morning in preparation, but it was when I interviewed you for The Guardian ahead of the film coming out, and that was a really interesting moment. I think Sandra Maischberg was also on the call, and we had a thorough discussion about it. But you've talked about finding the archives being opened, which was quite an unexpected moment. I think, I mean, there'd been some build-up over the years, and then finally the secretary of Riefenstahl, I think it was, who made them accessible. But when was the moment when you first of all thought, okay, there might be a film in this, but when did you actually realize there was a film in it? Because it wasn't so obvious when you were confronted with all these boxes and started going through and actually wondered to what extent the most interesting stuff had been sifted out already.
Yeah, of course, there was some sort of distrust in the beginning, and I was not sure, because when you deal with Leni Riefenstahl, you deal with a lot of repetitive, I call it sermon even. She always said the same things, like I was never interested in politics. I was just an artist, and I was celebrating the beauty of the body, and I was never interested in atrocities, and I learned about the concentration camps only after the war. So it's, of course, obvious to get somehow tired of her very soon. And so the question was, how do we get deeper into, first of all, the main question, who is Leni Riefenstahl? And I was somehow seduced by, I had great archive researchers, and somehow I was seduced by them because they knew what I'm interested in. And first of all, I got a personal, something like a diary with a note about her childhood. And so describing something like the violence she experienced by her father, he threw her into the water, and just she had to learn how to swim, and she was drowning and close to death. And the interesting point in this description was not, because it was written actually decades later, when she started to put down all the memories, so something like 60 years later. And the consequence, the conclusion was not I had a nasty, aggressive father. The consequence was I became a good swimmer. And for me, it was interesting. Why? Because it showed something like a pattern of fascism in a way. She was identifying with the strength, with the greatness of her father. And at the same time, she was contempting her own weakness. And that's the basic structure of her aesthetics, celebrating the strongness, the beauty of the body, and furthermore, of course, of the nation. And at the same time, contempting the weakness, the so-called unhealthiness. And in the very end, the strangers, the people, they don't belong to a nation. And that took me into another space or realm of thinking, of reflection on Riefenstahl, and that was the second question: what does she mean for today? And we discovered something like a renaissance of her aesthetics all around us. I remember dealing with some footage from a Moscow parade in 2022 after the Ukrainian war had started, and it was Triumph of the Will. So the low angle shot on Putin and the elevator shot, Riefenstahl put a camera on a constructed elevator, so she had both the perspective from above and showing the 100,000 people marching and standing still and admiring, and well, Adolf Hitler, who was presented in the low angle shot and then encircled with a rail shot, traverse shot. And so it was very similar. And at the same time, we discovered, and I think we will talk about this issue too, the presence or the topicality of the renaissance of the ideology. And this was something like, it really propelled me into the necessity to do the film. No doubt, I had to do it then.
Okay, and you touched there upon her relationship with her father. Why did it feel, and you brought this in quite early on in the film, why did it feel relevant to dwell, as you did, on the draft of her memoirs and the discarded version of it? I mean, if that's not obvious, I'm curious as well as what you have just teased out of that one incident about her learning to swim. You're a trained psychologist. I get the feeling that this has somehow fed into your approach to this. Yeah.
Well, of course, it's interesting for me as a psychologist, first of all, to see the difference of lies and truth, of course, but not in a moral sense. As a psychologist, I'm interested in the needs or wishes behind maybe they are not conscious, but what is behind the moral issue, why she had to lie. And why, for example, when you mentioned the drafts of her memoirs, they're so different in many, many aspects in comparison to the printed memoirs. So, of course, the main question is when Leni Riefenstahl is about to shift a narrative, not only regarding the drafts of the memoirs and the printed version, but in her whole life, she is always changing the narratives. And it has a lot to do with a specific kind of impact or fear. For example, I'll give you an example. She was an eyewitness of the first massacre of Jews. She was a war correspondent in the Polish campaign in the first days of the war. She came to a village named Konskie, and by chance, she was an eyewitness of the first massacre. It happened something like 4 German soldiers were killed the night before. They should be buried, and Jews were just caught and forced to dig the grave by their bare hands. And she wanted to film the courageous German soldiers, and the Jews were disturbing. So the first version was, I was an eyewitness. The second version was, I was far away. And the third version, it's not her version, it's something we found in her archive. It was something like a testimony of an adjutant. And he writes, she gave a stage direction, Jews off, the Jews panicked, and German soldiers shot the Jews. That's in short. So we have 3 different versions. And then it starts to get interesting, because it's not me that I'm judging and telling, like in a comment, listen, she's a liar. Of course she's lying, but I want to understand why she's lying, and why she's not only once lying, but whenever she opens her mouth, you can say she starts to lie till the end of her life. She's stuck in this some sort of corset of lies, and she can't escape. And that's something which was for me the most interesting question. How is it connected to a deep well, burden of guilt. So being a catalyst of the first massacre of Jews. And we have a photo where she's crying and shocked. It's in the film. Being a catalyst of massacre means she's much more involved regarding the burden of guilt. And then I could understand, not apologize, not excuse her, but I could understand why she had to repress all these stories and to develop, to reconstruct a new story. I was far away. I heard something just far away, and I was not an eyewitness even. And there you can see the different layers of storytelling and how is it connected to a specific finding, in this case, the letter of the adjutant in her archive. Interesting. She didn't destroy it or take it off.
Do you think she recognized the connection? I mean, was that an oversight on her part, that the fact that that letter remained in there?
That's an interesting question. Also, we were talking about the phone calls. So it's a lot of things, they also burden her regarding, it's also some way it shows how she's stuck in the ideology. And she kept it. So there are two reasons. One, she didn't get it, what these findings are in the very end, how I could use them in the storytelling. Maybe she was just obsessed by regarding these phone calls. We have to tell maybe people who don't know the film, there was a talk show in the 1970s, and she was celebrated again as the great artist, and most of the audience, the spectators, said, we are fed up with the German guilt, and she is like a symbol of an artist that should be just celebrated. Great Leni Riefenstahl, even with the Nuba coffee table books, it's a new proof of a sophisticated, well-known artist, and nobody should spit on her and connect her anyway to the Nazi era. So this in short, and then she got hundreds of phone calls. She taped them, she recorded them, and people were just applauding her, and a lot of Nazis were calling her, but also other people, young people even, and they all acclaimed her as a great artist. And for me, it was like a mirror of Germany of the 70s. And again, the question which you raised is, why did she keep these phone calls? And I think she considered them just as a proof, I am loved by the Germans again, and it will take, that's the last scene in the film. It's something like a recorded phone call. A guy says, it will take 1 or 2 generations, then Germany will return to the real values, order, virtue, decency. And for me, this was like a dark prophecy, because that's what we experience with the AfD right now. And maybe in 1 or 2 years, we will see them with a majority of the voters in Sachsen-Anhalt or other states in Germany. So in a way, Riefenstahl, we experience a renaissance of her values, of the ideology, of the aesthetics. And so the film for me is a warning, maybe out of the future even.
So I would like to possibly return to the chat show, because I think it's such a pinnacle moment in the film, the tentacles of all the messages that go out from that, of, you know, the expression of who she was, and also what you mentioned about her, the burden of guilt that she carried, because there are other examples of that you bring out in the film. But I'd like to, I don't want to miss this opportunity. You have been taking the film around the world to various different countries. Also, Sandra Maischberger has also gone to other places, and you've come back and compared notes, because the reception has been, from what you described to me, pretty overwhelming in each of the places you've been to, but extremely different according to where you've been. So you've just returned from the States. Maybe that is due to the current situation, the most interesting place from which we could start, and you could tell me a little bit about how it was received there.
Yeah. we actually the film was released in 5-6 cities like New York, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco, and following Washington and other cities. And I followed the film in a way, and the reaction was overwhelming. Why? Because so many people are affected directly by executive orders, by new regulations. They're about to flood the country, and people are deeply concerned. People are using the film somehow to connect their experience with the aesthetics and the ideology of the Third Reich. I'm a bit cautious. I always said, listen, we are not, even the States, it's not 1933. We can compare it, but there are differences. But people are so deeply overwhelmed by what happened to them. And just to give you an example, I was encircled by people after the Q&A, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes even 20. And people want to share their experience, how they are affected, how they are concerned. And it's a huge range. You have somebody who is one of the chief researchers regarding breast cancer. And he told me, listen, I don't get any more money for it. Why? It's an issue just for women. And the state says an issue just for women, breast cancer, it's not of general interest. You don't believe it, first of all. You think it's what strange kind of invention. No, it's true. And of course, you have people somebody who told me, a friend of mine, we didn't marry yet, but we don't know if we can marry, because if she enters a state office, she's in danger because she has not a permission, and maybe she get caught by the ICE. And so she doesn't leave her home. She doesn't go into a park. She doesn't go even in a supermarket. So of course, this is a state of fear. And when you look at people from the public radio stations, from the public TV stations, they all get huge problems because the funding is reduced or even cut off. And when you think of people working for the New York Times, there is this $15 billion that administration is charging them. And so it's a huge burden on the whole country. And the interesting question when I was talking to all these people was always why there is no uprising. And it has to do with the flood of executive orders every day, 5 to 10 new regulation, new orders. And sometimes it's just a threat. Sometimes it hits you directly because it becomes reality. And so everybody is engaged with his or her challenge, and there's hardly no solidarity. And there's a system behind it. It's the project 2025, and people know it. Of course, they know it. So regarding the media, of course, to fight against media, let's say quality, let's call them quality media. There's a quote by Steve Bannon who once said, to fight this quality, he didn't call it quality media, but mainstream media, you just have to flood the zone with shit. And then people can tell what is true, what is wrong, what is right. They're just flooded. And so it's not only the media get flooded, but also they are flooded with executive orders and regulations. And so it's something, in a way, the atmosphere. Really, there's a great book by Sebastian Haffner, Geschichte eines Deutschen, a story of a German. And he wrote it in, I think he went to London in exile, and he wrote it there in 1938. And it's overwhelming because he describes in the last chapters how he experienced the months from like December 1932 till summer 1933, how the ideology of the Nazi regime really is creeping into every detail of the everyday life. There is no escape. It's a total control of everything. And in a way, as I said, I'm always cautious to equate and say, listen, we are now, that's a new 1933. No, it's not. It's different. And somehow it's even more dangerous because you have now the power of social media. You have the power of AI, and Hitler and the party had no AI and not the power of the social media. And so you can't equate it. But of course, some structures are really similar, and that's really threatening. And coming back to Riefenstahl, it's triggering these experiences in a way. It's a safe island because you can talk about Riefenstahl. You don't have to talk about the present developments. You can talk about Riefenstahl as long as you want, and you can jump into the present or you can jump into the future. And it triggers both. And so it's a bit strange ambivalence regarding the success of the film.
There's almost like a disguise. The Riefenstahl film is a kind of disguise, or behind which one can discuss the other things that are going on.
Yeah.
This bittersweet that you mentioned. How is it affected the reaction to the film in Germany? So you talked to me about how when you were looking for funding for it, initially that was pretty difficult to get it because the potential sponsors were saying, why do we need another Riefenstahl film? Then, of course, when we see the beginning of the film, we see that it is actually supported by Westdeutscher Rundfunk, Norddeutscher Rundfunk, from all over Germany, you've had the support that you needed. Since you've been able to see the reception of it, and it's been sold to more than 35 countries, do you feel sort of slightly exonerated, or do you feel that there is recognition for what the film has achieved, that it served a purpose beyond the documentary itself?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to admit, it's when you make a documentary, and I always go deep into a research, it takes sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years to make a film. You never know when it's released how this world has changed. Sometimes I'm too late, sometimes I'm too early, and also regarding the funding, I experienced quite a lot that somehow you are out of everything and everybody is saying, why you need this film, and maybe come with the next project, let's skip this. Yeah. So when he started to finance the film in 2020, we had already the rise of the far right in Germany, but people even told me, well, listen, this is a film, you focus on the ambiguity of the character. You are also showing, or you want to understand why she became what she was, a prototype of fascism. And people reproached me, just to understand means to apologize, to excuse, to exonerate her. And I always said, no, you have to differentiate it. We have to understand what kind of lessons she took to become a role model of fascism. And that means to look also into her childhood, and to look at the encounter of people, mostly veterans from the First World War, during the shooting of the mountain films. Why it has something to do with fascism or with a lesson of fascism, because they came out of the ashes of the First World War, and Udet, as a pilot, he just put notes like, we came out of the ashes and we came out even stronger. The weak ones broke down and we came out even stronger. And that was something like a precondition, a premise to assemble under the flag of the Führer. And so you see it's how the impact of these veterans, how the impact of a very brutal father who told her to, well, to contempt the weakness and to identify with his aggression. Fascism starts in her case, not in 1932 when she met Hitler. Fascism starts much, much earlier with a specific kind of education, with a specific kind of impact, celebrating strongness. And maybe as a psychologist, you can call it something like screen memories regarding her violence. I'm a bit cautious of that because you always think you're going to victimize Leni Riefenstahl, which I won't do. But of course, we have to look very closely into what happened to her and to learn how you become a fascist. And that's something, that's a lesson. It was also a lesson for me. That's why I did the film. I wanted to learn something, not just stage a new tribunal. That's not enough. But you asked me for funding, and some of the people just said, no, we don't need it. We don't need ambivalence. We need sharp and clear positions. And that's also part of our time. We need sharp and clear decisions, and not somebody like me as an artist. I always try to make an open journey. I follow the footage, I follow the material, and I look something like the heartbeats of the footage. The footage has his or her own will, and so I can't force it. I try sometimes, but I fail. So we have to look what is the storytelling out of the footage. And then you have to rethink, of course. And rethinking always means open the channels to ambiguity and ambivalence.
You uncovered, interestingly, in 1934 interview that she'd given to the Daily Mirror, where she admitted to having read Mein Kampf and been, drooling over it and over Hitler. You also touched in the film because we were talking about burden of guilt, how she used gypsies from concentration camps, which there's evidence that she went into the concentration camps to handpick them, or at least to internment camps. And then said this was in particular for this film Lowlands, which was based on Hitler's favorite opera, and that then she had said that they had survived after the war, when in fact the majority of these I think it was 80 or 100 Sinti and Roma ended up being gassed in Auschwitz. So that you touch on that. I mean, it feels like that there's an awful lot more to go at, but you've said that there's also a book that you're writing to accompany the film where hopefully you'll be able to go into more detail. Then there was also the filmmaker that she had worked with, or the cameraman, Willi Zielko, who had ended up in a psychiatric unit, and it is kind of ambiguous as to whether she could have saved him if she had wanted to. They're just two aspects of her that are not so well known, and it kind of seemed to come together in the focus on what one knew and what one didn't know. She said she'd known about Dachau, but she thought only spies had been sent there, and the only Jews she'd known had all escaped. She doesn't say why they would have escaped, but then how her doctor had left in 1938, and that was the sort of seemed to be like the closest associate that she had had. And in the chat show, then it seems it all comes together in that one question which we are always asking, how much did people know and how much did they choose not to know? And she says that she only found out after the war what had happened, and how could she have known at the beginning? I mean, the ways in which the language sort of gets so like this kind of the bagel logic that she seems to apply to it. In the chat show, did you feel that the fact that she was speaking on behalf of many Germans, that was why she had had such a response on her answer machine, which you described, the answer machine messages you described as being the treasure box in the 700 boxes of archives that you found?
I think we have to connect it with the German history, how Germany dealt after the war with Auschwitz. We had something like a first you could call it a wake-up call. This was, of course, the trial in Jerusalem, the Eichmann trial, but then it was somehow lost again. And then we had, in 1964, we had the Auschwitz trial. And in the 68 movements, a lot of young people started to ask questions. Also asking why there are so people, this continuity regarding officials, regarding judges. They were very successful during the Nazi era, and now they were representatives in high rank positions, also in the government. Even the Chancellor, Kiesinger, he was part of the propaganda ministry in Germany in the Nazi era. So we had some sort of, at least, well, a trial against the parents to discover something, to learn something. And what you see 6 years later or 8 years later in the talk show and the reactions of the German audience in these 500 phone calls and I think something like 2,000 letters, and I really read them. And maybe she put some critical letters away, but the phone calls were not edited. And the majority, I would say 98%, were just applauding. And why? Because it was like something like a backslash after, well, as I said, the years before, the issue came up and the question of general guilt, who is responsible, and there were surveys, and 86% of the people who are asked were somehow against the regime. This couldn't be true, of course, but when you listen to the phone calls, then you see it's like a reaction. Now we speak up. The majority, the silent majority, can now identify with a Leni Riefenstahl. And so it's a mirror of the Germany of the 70s, of course. And so it widens the aspect. It's not only a film on Leni Riefenstahl. It shows the necessity even of a majority of people who still have a longing for some sort of guidance, authorities, people who tell them what is wrong and right, and the values, order, decency, and virtue. And that's so current. When you think of the end of the film, the last phone call was something like one of the guys tells Leni Riefenstahl, it will take 1 or 2 generations, then we come back. Yeah, and that's what we experience today.
And just maybe a final point that I'd like to make before we could then maybe open it up to questions was you've said that it doesn't actually matter that she's obviously lying, and there's many examples of it in the film that you bring out, which are quite excruciating to watch. But you said that people want the lie, and that's the crucial point. Can you maybe explain a little bit about that, what you mean by that?
Yeah, the interesting question when I talk to people about maybe even a strange opinion, I always think it doesn't make sense, because we can just fight against this or that opinion, but it's senseless. People stick to it. The interesting question, why they have a longing to lies or to fake news, and it makes somehow life easier when you can identify with somebody who's strong and who gives you guidelines, and who's you can identify also with a nation or with somebody who tells you you are better than. It's always a separation, we and them. And the idea of supremacy means you get some strength out of it, because by birth or by nation, you are better than. And so people, I won't do it, reduce it as a psychologist. There must be some feeling of humiliation, or people don't get recognized. It's too simplistic. But of course, there's a longing for salvation. And simplistic solutions offer some sort of salvation. It's so easy. We just have to kick these migrants out and they spoil our blood. And I spoke in the US right now, 2 weeks ago. I spoke to people who depend on a healthcare insurance, who depend on subsidies for food or for high rent or whatever, and they won't get it anymore. And I asked them, and then you're gonna vote for this guy a second time? And they said yes, because he speaks our language. And that's even if he is really against their basic interests, they are voting for him. And that's what I mean when people have a longing for this very strange kind of identification with strongness, with greatness, and supremacy. And that's worldwide. It's the same thing here in Germany. And when you talk to people in Italy or in many other, Hungary, India, for example, Modi, who is very clever in moderating us and them. So in this case, it's the Muslims. Anyway, so it's a worldwide phenomenon.
And not least what's going on in London or in the UK right now as well. Which,
sure.
So Tamara, is that the moment where you maybe can open the floor?
Yes, I just also wanted to remind all attendees, so if you have a question, you can either raise your hand, so we have one raised hand here already, or you can put your questions in the Q&A. I'm just, David Field has a question, so I'm just, David, could you talk?
I would like to know how somebody of the new generations would react if they see the Triumph des Willens, the Triumph of the Will film.
Well, actually, it's a boring film, first of all. It's a long and boring film, very repetitive.
Yes.
Soldiers are marching, SR is marching, SS is marching. And but they're, let's say, 10 minutes, they're really crucial. They're somehow overwhelming. As I said, the aesthetics of some sort, it's the way how the Führer, Adolf Hitler, is presented. It's a apotheosis, and it's well done. It's very good. It's really propaganda. And I think these are the so-called dangerous scenes. But I think in Germany, this film is somehow prohibited. It's not possible to watch it only in schools and special events with some sort of introduction. But I think we have to debate it. We have to debate the way how propaganda works, and how Leni Riefenstahl did a very good job, because hundreds of other films and also directors think of I don't know, it was even Tarantino who celebrated her as one of the greatest artists ever. So it's not just anyone who said things like that. So separating art and politics, that was the way how Riefenstahl wanted to escape, but also Tarantino celebrating Leni Riefenstahl and celebrating her as a greatest artist, is in the trap of separating arts and politics. And that's a dangerous thing. And that's something which you can use, showing Triumph of the Will and showing Leni Riefenstahl, who says it's just a documentary, I didn't stage anything. It's one of the most sophisticated pieces of propaganda, but only these 10 minutes. The rest is just boring.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have a question in the question and answer box as well. Someone asks whether there is some connection to Hannah Arendt's book Eichmann in Jerusalem, Banalität des Bösen. I'm not sure if you can comment on that a little, Andres.
Yeah, well, Riefenstahl's work is not banal. Of course, you can say it's a celebration of the strongness and the superior and the victorious, that's banal. No, it's not banal, because it's somehow also overwhelming. She was a master of an editor, so I won't compare it to Eichmann. That's maybe the crucial point. When you think of the high diving scene, it's really well edited. It's innovative. It's also overwhelming in the way how she keeps the bodies somehow in the air, like machine man, and we can't compare her to Eichmann. She was a woman. She had to fight in a male-dominated world of the Nazi Party, so it's much more complex. I think we can use Hannah Arendt when you think about all the experience what I described right now in the States, but we can compare it also something what happens in Russia or in China or in even in our countries. So the question of how people get seduced to follow these ideals, even if their own interests are hurt, and it's something which is not rational. But I think Hannah Arendt has a lot of interesting tools, but I wouldn't use at the moment triumph the banality of evil.
Thank you. Peter Wilson Smith has a question in the chat. Peter, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello. You painted a fascinating picture of this person, someone who seemed to have sort of created a persona which she occupied, almost like she was on the other side of her camera. And you talked about how you responded to her as a filmmaker and a psychologist. But I wondered, did you also respond to her on a sort of human level as well? I mean, was there something, did you feel you could get close to a person there who had a more sympathetic side than the Nazi propagandist? And also related to that, I mean, were there aspects of her skill as an artist and a filmmaker which were in some way redeeming, despite what she did as a propagandist?
Okay, there are two questions. First of all, I was talking about my ambivalent approach, and that, of course, meant not to say just a tribunal and to point at her or to put her in a sort of coffin and let's sink her at the deepest point of the Atlantic, because she's one of us. And she comes out of the middle of the society. And so this makes her even more dangerous, because she's not an alien, she's not a monster. And so this was something like, let's say, the first idea how we were debating in the editing room, how could we find an approach to Leni Riefenstahl, and I always use the word ambiguity and ambivalence. And for example, I was fighting against my editors, and I achieved what I wanted in the very end. I was fighting for the scene regarding the experience of violence in her childhood, but also with the first lover, and later on it might had happened that she was raped by Goebbels. And actually, even with her first husband, there was something, it's not in the film, but there was something in a diary that he raped her too. So there's really something like a continuity of the experience of violence. And I always said it's not the issue that I want to exonerate her from the responsibilities or look at her. She was also a victim, so please take into consideration. But more like to look at her, yes, like a human being who experienced this violence, but also to see it as a lesson. as I said, somebody who is identifying with the aggression and at the same time contempting her own weakness, being thrown into the water by a father who told her how she had to learn to swim, and she was close to death. At least that's something she describes in the drafts of the memoirs. So, and that gives me some sort of a hint why she followed these ideals of celebrating the greatness and the victorious and the superior, the supremacy. And so I felt I was fighting for these scenes, and the only question was at what stage of the film regarding the structures, where can we put it? Because it could be read like an exoneration. Oh, she was a victim. So was it too early? We put it too early, then we put it after Konskier. It was impossible. So it's a long journey, and you have to see it as a process of trial and error. But for me, the ambivalent approach was very, very important, not just to blame her. It's too simplistic.
Yeah, thank you, Andres. So there is a question from Lucy Jones. She would like to know whether there was any piece of media that you found that you wish you had included in the film, or something that has stayed with you that you didn't include.
Yeah, there was actually also a challenge. We had long debates in the editing room. She had a lot of private films, and her later husband, in the beginning, she called him my assistant. She treated him like a child sometimes. Anyway, so he filmed her and she filmed him, and actually very intimate scenes. And she left it in her estate, like in the bathtub, 85 years old, Leni Riefenstahl in the bathtub, flirting with Horst Kettner. And also a sequence, I think, some hours before she died. He even filmed her then. I think even he filmed her dying. And of course, we were debating, well, she left it, so we have the freedom to use it. But then I said, okay, even Leni Riefenstahl, who had no empathy at all towards her extras in Lowlands, towards anybody who worked with her, like Willi Zieke, who was admitted to the psychiatry and forcibly sterilized without any intervention by her. I won't use it. Why? I had some sort, I felt, okay, she is a human being and I want to respect her, and I don't want to show her dying, because it also meant to tell the whole story of her life from birth in a way to death. And I said, no, we were also debating in the editing room. I said, no, let's find an ending which shows the topicality of Leni Riefenstahl, not showing she died. Then you think, okay, we can get rid of her. She is dead. No, her ideology and her aesthetics are not only alive. We experience a renaissance.
There is one final question in the chat from Renate Wright. She's asking, what was the age group you interviewed who said we want fake news and lies?
Well, people don't tell me we want fake news and lies, but there is a wish in a way. I always ask myself, because some people in this world, they spread fake news and lies, and Leni Riefenstahl did it in the same way, and she was very repetitive, and in the end she was believing her own lies and legends. And that's an interesting process, because first of all, you know you're lying, but then it's somehow synchronized. The lie becomes a new truth. And as I said, it's not a question of morality. It's a question what kind of needs and wishes, maybe unconscious needs and wishes, these lies fulfill. And sometimes it's easier to believe in a lie because it gives you a specific sort of strength of identification of he does it for us. He takes effort and gets blamed by others, but in the very end, he's against the migrants, and the migrants are threatening me because I get no job because of them, etc. All these cliches. And I think that's something we have to go deeper into, because the clash of opinions, they don't help us anymore. We have to understand the breeding ground, and the breeding ground is fear, humiliation, and to get into some sort of understanding, because otherwise we just remain in our bubbles, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know, we are almost at the end of this session. I don't know, Kate, would you like to come in just for like a final, I don't know, comment or question that you might have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really clear to us all how relevant the film is, and we're really grateful to Andres for having made it. And I just wanted to ask, because there was a reference at the end to Wim and Donata Wenders. You acknowledged them, and I just wondered what role they had to play. Was it a supportive role, and to what extent German filmmakers have felt, that they are responsible somehow for what happens with the legacy of Leni Riefenstahl?
Well, I have to admit, Donata, I know for something like 40 years now. And she was one of the camera women of my very, very first film. And so it's like friends and family in a way. And Wim, I met many times. We both have not so far away, something like a second home in the countryside. So it's always very important when people who don't know the whole process, they came in when we were quite far with the editing between the, I don't know, the third version of a rough cut. And they were also critical, but in a very productive way. They really shifted the film with their some remarks to another level, and I'm always grateful when I get criticized on a good level, of course. And that's it. So that's why when I'm grateful, whoever helps me, I'm grateful, and he or she will mentioned in the credits.
Thank you. It's lovely to discuss this with you.
Yeah, thank you for helping, inviting, and moderating, especially to you, Kate. Thank you. Again, we had the second now great conversation on the film.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Tamara, for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you for coming and joining us for this call. And thank you to everyone in the audience as well. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was super interesting. So thank you so much. And our next event is next week on the 30th of September. It's a talk on federalism in Germany, and it will be held at the University of Edinburgh. So if some of you are in Scotland during that time, please come and join us. And yeah, thank you again, and have a lovely evening. And I hope to see
I want
you again
to
soon.
add
Yes.
something.
Oh,
I
sorry.
will be in Aldeburgh, that's south of Norwich, at, I think it's the 20th till 22nd of November, and showing Riefenstahl. Whoever wants to make a little trip to the North Sea, it's a great coast. I saw it, and it's a great village or little town. So come to Aldeburgh. I don't know how is it pronounced, Aldeburgh or Aldeburgh?
Aldborough, is it where the opera festival, where Benjamin Britten came from?
That's possible.
Yeah.
It's on the coast side, south of Norwich. That's the only thing I know. And it's very beautiful with colored houses and close to the seaside, directly a long beach. It's amazing. I just saw it on photos, but I will be there. And I think it's the last, not the last weekend, but let me check the last seconds. It will be November 21st to 23rd. And on the 22nd, the film is shown in the evening. Okay, thank you.
Lovely.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.